Some moments are so loud, they leave an echo that lasts a lifetime. They aren't just about the noise, the cheers, or the spectacle. They're about the silence that comes right before. That singular, breathless second when thousands of people hold the same thought, the same impossible hope. It's a collective dream, hanging in the air like a held breath. We talk about unforgettable entrances, about legendary returns, but we often forget what makes them powerful. It isn't the fireworks or the music. It's the story. It's the raw, human emotion that fuels the fire. And sometimes, the most explosive moments, the ones that shake an arena to its very foundation, are born from a ghost. This is the story of a roar so loud it became a cage, and of the one person who had to find her own silence in the middle of the storm. The air in the arena was thick with the bittersweet taste of inevitability. In the center of the ring, under the unforgiving glare of the lights, the champion stood tall. They called him the Monarch, a fitting name for a man who ruled his kingdom with an iron will and a cruel, methodical precision. His challenger, a beloved fan favorite, was broken at his feet. The referee's hand was raised, ready to begin the final 3 count that would seal another victory in a reign defined by dominance and disdain. 20,000 people had fallen into a resigned quiet. They had hoped for a miracle, but were now preparing for the familiar disappointment. The monarch smirked, soaking in their silent surrender. It was the moment he savored most. Not the victory itself, but the sound of hope dying. He raised a hand to signal the end, and then darkness. Not a flicker, but a sudden, total plunge into blackness. The Jumbotron died. The spotlights vanished. The entire world was reduced to the shuffling feet and nervous whispers of a crowd lost in an artificial night. A collective gasp swept through the stands, a wave of pure, unscripted shock. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't resignation. It was a vacuum, a deep, profound emptiness filled with a single, electrifying question. What is happening? For 10 long seconds, there was nothing. Just the darkness, the anticipation, and the feeling that the very rules of this world were about to be rewritten forever. And then it came. A sound that cut through the blackness like a distant memory. A single, haunting guitar note, warped and melancholic, echoed through the cavernous space. It was a familiar sound, yet different. Slower, sadder. It was the opening chord to an anthem that hadn't been heard in these arenas for over a decade. The theme music of a legend, the song of the Sentinel, a man who had walked away at the height of his power, vanishing into myth. The crowd froze. Whispers erupted like wildfire. No way. It can't be. But the music continued to build. The iconic riff now backed by a mournful orchestra, turning a war cry into a eulogy. It wasn't the triumphant anthem they remembered. It was the sound of a ghost returning to his home. The realization washed over the audience, not as a cheer, but as a slow, dawning wave of disbelief. People rose to their feet, their phones forgotten, their eyes straining towards the entrance ramp, desperately trying to pierce the suffocating darkness. The sound swelled, filling every corner of the arena, a testament to a legacy that time could not erase. This wasn't just a surprise return, it was something more profound. It was history breathing again, the collective memory of an entire generation roaring back to life through a single, unforgettable song. The darkness held, but the silence had been broken by the sound of a legend's ghost. A blinding white light erupted from the entrance tunnel, carving a stark silhouette against the darkness. The crowd roared, a single unified voice chanting a name not spoken with this much reverence in years. Sentinel! 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 They were ready to welcome home their hero, to witness the impossible return of the man who defined an era. But as the figure took its first few steps, a subtle confusion began to ripple through the stands. The silhouette. It was wrong. It was too slender, too fluid in its movement. It lacked the broad, imposing frame of the legend they remembered. The chant began to falter, replaced by a murmur of questioning excitement. The figure stopped at the top of the ramp, still obscured by the brilliant backlight. The music swelled to a crescendo, and then she stepped forward into the full view of the arena lights. The camera zoomed in, and 20,000 people saw her face. It was the face of a stranger, a young woman no older than 22, with sharp features and an expression of cold, unnerving calm. But her eyes were unmistakable. They were his. The same fiery intensity, the same defiant spirit that had once captivated the world. The roar of recognition for the man they expected died in an instant, replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of collective breath. It was a silence born not of disappointment, but of sheer, unadulterated shock. Who was she? For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the arena was suspended in stunned silence. Then, 2 words flashed across the giant screen above. Kaya. Just that. No last name was necessary. In that instant, every single person in the building and the millions watching at home connected the dots. The Sentinel's daughter. The commentators, for the first time in their storied careers, were speechless. They fumbled for words, their voices cracking with the enormity of the moment. The crowd's shock finally shattered, and the silence was replaced by a sound unlike any other. It was an explosion. A deafening, soul-shaking roar that was part joy, part disbelief, and part the crushing weight of a decade's worth of expectation being placed upon the shoulders of this young woman. She didn't smile or play to the crowd. She simply walked, her every step measured and deliberate, down the long ramp towards the ring. She moved not like a rookie making her debut, but like a queen returning to claim her throne. Her gaze never left the champion in the ring, the monarch, whose look of arrogant confidence had now melted into one of pure, bewildered fury. The crowd was chanting her name now, a name they had only just learned, but it was already the sound of destiny. For Kaya, that deafening roar wasn't just an introduction, it was the heaviest burden in the world. While the arena erupted, a different kind of storm was brewing backstage in the maze of corridors and locker rooms known as gorilla position. The monarch, whose championship moment had just been stolen, was supposed to be a picture of villainous rage for the cameras. But the rage was real. He ripped off his headset, screaming at anyone who would listen that this was not the plan. His carefully crafted moment of triumph had been sacrificed for a ghost story. In a dimly lit office, the promotion's owner, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Silas, watched the monitor with a serene, unreadable expression. This was his masterstroke, a secret he'd guarded for months. He had just created the biggest star in the industry with a single musical cue. But in the locker room, the reaction was more complicated. Awe, certainly. But it was quickly followed by a bitter, unspoken resentment. Wrestlers who had spent years paying their dues, wrestling in small halls, and clawing their way up the ladder, watched in stony silence. They had bled, sacrificed their bodies and their families, all for a fraction of the adoration this newcomer received simply for sharing a bloodline. They saw her, and they didn't see a prodigy. They saw a shortcut. A line had been drawn. Kaya's arrival wasn't just an entrance. It was a fundamental shift in the company's landscape, and it had instantly created 1,000 invisible enemies in the one place she would need allies. Far from the noise and the politics, in the sterile quiet of her private dressing room, Kaya's phone vibrated against a steel bench. The screen lit up with a name she both cherished and feared. "Dad," she answered, her hand trembling slightly. The voice on the other end was not the booming, confident voice of the sentinel the world remembered. It was quiet, heavy with a weariness that only he and she understood. He wasn't congratulating her. He hadn't watched the show. He didn't need to. He could hear the faint roar of the crowd through her phone, and he recognized the sound for what it was. He had warned her against this life, had painted a grim picture of the sacrifices, the loneliness, the way the industry consumes souls. He had walked away to save his own. Now his daughter had willingly stepped into the very fire he had escaped. "That noise," he said, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "That isn't for you, Kaya. You have to know that." She said nothing, clutching the phone tightly. "They're not cheering for the woman who walked down that ramp. They're cheering for a memory. They don't love you," he continued, his words a painful, unvarnished truth. "They love a ghost, and there is nothing heavier to carry." He was not angry, but he wasn't proud either. He was terrified. He knew that the sound of their love was the sound of a cage being built. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of manufactured reality. Kaya was no longer a person, she was a phenomenon. Her face was on every sports website, her entrance clip had broken streaming records, and her name was a worldwide trend. She was shuttled from one sterile television studio to the next, seated across from smiling hosts who all asked the same questions. But their questions were never truly for her. What was it like growing up as the Sentinel's daughter? Is your father training you? Is he planning a return to the ring? Every inquiry was a subtle, painful reminder that her identity was merely a reflection of his. She was a footnote in her own story. They didn't ask about the years of brutal training in obscurity, the injuries she overcame, or the personal dreams that drove her. They only saw her as a conduit to the past. She answered each question with a detached, almost robotic grace, a shield she had built to protect herself. On the outside, she was poised, confident, and ready for the spotlight. But on the inside, with every interview, every headline that screamed her father's name instead of hers, a small part of her felt like it was suffocating. The world had handed her a crown, but it was a borrowed one, and it grew heavier with every passing hour. She was the star of a show in which she felt like an imposter. The following evening, long after the crews had gone home, Kaya stood alone in the center of the silent, empty arena. The roar was gone, leaving an unnerving quiet in its place. "It's different when they're not screaming for you, isn't it?" A voice echoed from the stands. The monarch emerged from the shadows, walking slowly down the steps. He wasn't in his ring gear. He was in a simple tracksuit, his expression devoid of the theatrical villainy he projected on screen. There were no cameras, no audience, just the two of them in the heart of the empire she had disrupted. He stopped a few feet from her, his voice low and chillingly sincere. "I'm not going to threaten you," he said. "I'm going to tell you the truth. That sound you heard, it's a drug, and one day they will take it away." He looked around the empty seats. "I've spent 15 years earning their respect. And earning this," he said, pointing to the championship title slung over his shoulder. "You got it all in 10 seconds with a song that isn't even yours. They will cheer you as long as you remind them of him. But the moment you try to be yourself, the moment you fail to live up to his ghost, they will turn on you. Because they don't love you, Kaya. They love the idea of you." His words were not a threat. They were a prophecy. The weeks that followed were a blur of success. Kaya was everything the promotion had hoped for. Her merchandise flew off the shelves, ratings soared whenever she appeared, and she won every match put in front of her. She was on a meteoric rise, a rocket ship to the main event. But with each victory, the light in her eyes seemed to dim. The thunderous applause that once felt like a validation now felt like a demand. The chants of her name started to sound like her father's. When she looked out at the sea of faces, she no longer saw individuals. She saw a single expectant entity staring through her, searching for the ghost they truly wanted to see. She was a prisoner of a story she never wrote. Every move she made was compared to his. Every victory was framed as another chapter in his legacy. The monarch's prophecy and her father's warning echoed in her mind during the quiet moments alone in hotel rooms. She was living a dream, but it was someone else's. The world saw a conquering hero, a dynasty reborn. but all she felt was the crushing weight of a second-hand crown and the chilling realization that she was becoming the most famous, most beloved, and most invisible person in the world. The roar had become her prison, and she was starting to forget what silence sounded like. It happened on a Tuesday, in Silas's top-floor office overlooking the city. The promoter was ecstatic, laying out the plans for the next 6 months, a championship match at the biggest event of the year, a passing the torch storyline. He spoke of legacy, of dynasty, of a decade of guaranteed success. Kaya listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he finally finished, breathless with excitement, she didn't respond. Instead, she gently folded the custom leather jacket she wore to the ring, the one designed with a subtle nod to her father's emblem, and placed it on the polished mahogany of his desk. "I'm done," she said, her voice calm and clear. Silas stared, baffled. "Done? What are you talking about? You're on top of the world. We're giving you everything." Kaya turned and looked out the window at the distant arena. "You already did," she replied. "That night, that explosion when I walked out, it was the loudest sound I've ever heard. For a minute, I thought it was for me." She paused, a faint, sad smile on her lips. But it wasn't. It was an echo. And I finally realized you can't build a future on an echo of the past. The narrator concludes, "The moment that seemed like the triumphant beginning was, in fact, the end of the story the world wanted to write." She walked into the roar not to claim a legacy, but to finally understand its crushing weight. And in the profound silence that followed her choice, in walking away from the noise, she finally heard her own voice. The greatest comeback wasn't her explosive arrival. It was her quiet departure,